power of men is first a metaphysical assertion of self, an I am that exists a priori, indifferent to denial or challenge. It expresses intrinsic authority. It never ceases to exist, no matter how or on what grounds it is attacked, and some assert that it survives physical death. This self is not merely subjectively felt. It is protected by laws and customs, proclaimed in art and in literature, documented in history, upheld in the distribution of wealth. This self cannot be eradicated or reduced to nothing. It is. When the subjective sense of self falters, institutions, devoted to its maintenance, buoy it up. The first tenet of male supremacist ideology is that men have this self and that women must, by definition, lack it. Male self seems to be a contradiction. On the one hand, it hangs suspended in thin air. It is magically perpetual. It requires nothing to sustain or support it. On the other hand, it is entitled to take what it wants to sustain or improve itself, to have anything, to requite any need at any cost. In fact, there is no contradiction, just a simple circle. The nature of the male self is that it takes, so that, by definition, the absolute self is expressed in the absolute right to take what it needs to sustain itself. The immutable self of the male boils down to an utterly unself-conscious parasitism. The self is the conviction, beyond reason or scrutiny, that there is an equation between what one wants and the fact that one is. Going Descartes one better, this conviction might be expressed.
I wish Nikki Freeman loved me more than anyone in the fucking world.
I want, and I am entitled to have. Therefore I am. Andrea Dworkin. Pornography. Men possessing women. I liked Obsession. I thought it was pretty good, honestly, but the hype around the movie blew me away. Before it hit digital, I was wondering what the obsession with the movie was. Obsession has two focuses. Bear as a representation of man as both abuser to women and victim to patriarchy, and Nikki as victim to patriarchy in general and Bear in specificity. And yet, the movie says nothing further than, yo, isn't this so fucked up? The most immediate evidence to Bear's terrible behaviors would probably be the opening scene. There's cans of food strewn about. The cat's bag of food was in a place where they could tear straight into it, and amidst it all was an accessible pill bottle on his kitchen counter, filled to the brim with what's assumed to be his recently deceased grandmother's oxycodone, normally stored in his bathroom mirror. His TV is on in the background while he's out the house. He's bawling his eyes out, and despite all of that, he still goes out with his friends the same night to have a conversation he is not prepared for with a girl he is deeply infatuated with but knows nearly nothing about despite being one of her childhood friends. He picks a novelty over getting her something she would actually value.
Oh, I just dropped my crystal necklace down the drain.
Oh shit. It's one that's like good energy, like good vibes.
And then uses the gift he got for her for himself.
I left it at home.
He has very little in the way of actual personality.
And then you leaned in and you whispered, I'll be in your band.
Very little meaningful sociability with Nikki, even when she's literally obsessed with him later on, and is obsessed with the role she occupies for him as a status symbol. She more occupies the role of the baddie that he managed to nab than as a person he wants to aspire to truly spend his life with. She is a trophy, not a person, and that is exemplified especially through how he acts even when the fact that this is not Nikki is rubbed in his face.
What the fuck? What? Oh my god, I'm so sorry.
When he calls into the customer support line for the Wish-A-Willow and hears Nikki screaming as though she's trapped within herself,
Nikki. Do you want to speak to her?
he just hangs up. Before that, instead of trying to cancel his wish outright, he wants to find a way to alter it. He molests Nikki every time they fuck. Whatever is possessing Nikki is clearly not feeling it the way Bear is, lying to him and telling him.
Oh, that was amazing, baby.
In the real killer moment, when the real Nikki manages to get through in her sleep to Bear, begging him to kill her,
Bear?
I'm just getting water.
Kill me, please.
he turns it into a pity party, asking her,
What would be so bad? What's so bad about being with me?
before running off to converse with Sarah. Bear is a loser. Bear is selfish. Bear is incredibly misogynistic, wanting to possess Nikki, feeling entitled to her as opposed to wanting an equal partner in life. Bear's behaviors are indicative of his attitudes. Yet all the same, if you attempt to probe deeper at Bear's attitudes, you get nothing. We learn nothing about how Bear was groomed into these behaviors. Nothing is actually said about the status of Nikki as a conquest and trophy for Bear to tote around. The roles the women are forced to occupy in the movie are merely logical extremes, lacking any real depth or commentary on the roles themselves. The lens of systemic misogyny is laid over the entire movie, even as they peer behind the curtain of interpersonal drama to go, yo, isn't this so fucked up? My issue with Obsession ultimately stems from the fact that it is about the individualization, the personalization of systemic issues, not just their manifesting in the personal. Bear is all these things, and everything about the movie stems from the fact that Bear is a selfish prick. But his attitudes are the evolution and result of the kinds of behaviors that men are born into and bred into from birth, such as the inherent sexualization of women and the lack of development of emotional capacity leading to repression and unhealthy coping mechanisms. Nikki, the whole movie, is fucking possessed. What is Bear's excuse for his lack of emotional culpability? Being groomed into being a man. Bear's actions stem from attitudes that themselves stem from systemic oppression against women, but the movie doesn't frame it that way. The closest we get to the idea of these behaviors and attitudes being taught, reinforced, and encouraged is Ian going,
It kind of looks like Nikki's going through something. It kind of looks like you're taking advantage of the situation. And I say it with love, bro. I'm saying it with love. I'm on your side, but it's a bad look.
when talking about how it kind of seems like Bear is taking advantage of what is perceived to be a mental breakdown on Nikki's end. Ian holds beliefs similar to Bear, but since he is not a social failure the way Bear is, those attitudes and behaviors are more acceptable because they manifest differently than they do in Bear. This disassociation from the systemic nature of these issues is really shown through Ian and Sarah, actually. Ian gives massive lip service to how vile Bear's behaviors are, but at the end of checking him, he still capitulates to the idea that Bear has to prove that his relationship isn't some weird codependent shit, instead of actually staying on the fact that Bear's behavior is really fucked up. This is because Ian is also a misogynist due to the same systemic factors that make Bear one. The difference is that Ian isn't also a loser in the traditional sense, and that gives him some amount of awareness and social capability, being able to get with women and host parties and make friends that Bear clearly lacks, while still maintaining unhealthy beliefs, giving Bear credit he does not deserve. As the audience, we have an understanding the characters involved do not. We see how actually terrible Bear truly is. Even with that in mind, Ian is in support of Bear bagging Nikki until Bear fills him in on the situation.
So you told her how you felt, and then
I didn't tell her. What? I didn't tell her.
Immediately finding it a bit weird on Bear's end, and that feeling only increasing despite Bear's twisting of the story when explaining it to Ian because Bear doesn't have the social capability to properly spin the perspective in a way that doesn't still make him look incredibly weird. Ian knows and understands this about both Bear and the situation, and still says that he sides with Bear in the interaction, but it would reflect badly on him to socially, outwardly stand with Bear in the situation. It's a tease at the sociocultural ideas behind the attitudes, but it still ultimately just spins them into these interpersonal dynamics, not actually touching on the fact that these attitudes themselves stem from deeper places. It just kind of somewhat acknowledges them as a sideline that they exist. As for Sarah, she seemed like a great character. I loved Sarah. She is, however, reduced to the other woman, the competition for obsessed Nikki in her attempt at conquering Bear's heart. This focus makes for pretty good interpersonal drama. Sarah battling between wanting to tell Bear for her own selfish reasons, she is the other woman, but also just not wanting someone she views as a good friend to be used as a battleground between two of their mutual friends due to his lack of both knowledge and social ability to become aware of the context between Nikki and Ian. The Ian-Nikki connection is not hidden, per se. It is not explicit until later, but there are good hints throughout that Ian and Nikki have a deeper relationship than just the friend group. Ian's coaching of Bear consisting of a mixture of selfishness.
Grab drinks sometime. She always invites you.
Yeah, exactly.
I asked you guys not to come to trivia for one night.
You can't ask her out of trivia, Bear. You can't. I'm not gonna let you.
And things that he can probably get off because Nikki, at least used to, fuck with him in a way she does not fuck with Bear.
She's sensitive about
Like,
that.
hey, remember when you used to get bullied? Everybody called you Freaky Nikki? She'll be like, oh my god, no, Bear, that was so long ago. No, please.
Ian could probably get away with calling her Freaky Nikki in a way that Bear absolutely, clearly could not and did not get away with.
Night, Freaky Nikki.
Ew, don't call me that.
So Bear was the only one not completely caught up on the social dynamics of what seems like his only group of friends. Sarah was torn between effectively being almost sworn to secrecy about things that might have made shit awkward,
And if Ian's gonna spread my shit, then you should know. Ian
and watching her least socially capable friend seemingly catch pot shots in the Cold War between Nikki and Ian. After both reveals and her discussion/debrief with Bear in the car, it still inevitably pivots to how she likes Bear, and how Bear clearly, well, if he didn't really like her in the same way, he definitely saw her as a potential exit ramp from whatever was going on with him and Nikki.
He thinks that she's dating you to get back at him. You need someone.
Like you.
It is completely fixed on the relationships as the final culmination of all the information, at the expense of even the information itself, over and over again. Then, Sarah is brutally murdered in what is, in a movie where a female character mutilates herself and is willing to obliterate her total sense of self for another male character's attention, and another man has his face blown out, the most brutal section of the movie. Her body is then positioned in Bear's house, missing its face after being beaten in with a brick like a voyeuristic sex doll, tits out in a jacket, her legs open and exposed. This could be fantastic symbolism, but in a movie that very purposely toys with the ideas of systemic violence only to kind of brush them aside or ignore them, dismiss them outright, or even purposely and pointedly use them to enhance its imagery at the expense of its message, it rings out incredibly sour. In her essay on photography, Susan Sontag frames the context of a camera as a voyeuristic involvement. The view of the lens is not a passive one. The director, the cameraman, the audience are actors in the story through the intentionally chosen framing and perception of the events that occur in the film. Here, in this moment, it is the brutality between women in a movie that has specifically gone out of its way to disenfranchise this notion of violence that we are ritualistically participating in. Sontag states that an event known through photographs certainly becomes more real than it would have if one had never seen the photographs. But after repeated exposure to images, it also becomes less real. The same law holds for evil as for pornography. The shock of photographed atrocities wears off with repeated viewings, just as the surprise and bemusement felt the first time one sees a pornographic movie wears off after one sees a few more. The sense of taboo which makes us indignant and sorrowful is not much sturdier than the sense of taboo that regulates the definition of what is obscene. And both have been sorely tried in recent years. Watching Sarah get bludgeoned to death is the ultimate culmination of voyeuristic femicide, violence witnessed on one woman by another at the behest of a man, while her body is strung up on a chair, with her tits exposed and her face still dripping blood for our viewing pleasure, stripped of its meaning in the greater context of the things that really both create and enable Bear's attitude and the behavior stemming from it that created all of these events, solely for the creators to look at the audience and go, yo, isn't that so fucked up? I get this is all done on purpose. Sure, the point is that it's because Sarah is the other woman. But that doesn't really matter. This gratuitous display of violence in an otherwise relatively sterile movie is demonstrative of this sterilization of violence against women. Even in the same movie that is in its entirety about the enacting of violence against a woman. And yes, I think the movie is relatively sterile. Nikki shits herself and Bear eats his dead cat, but these events are purposefully obstructed from our direct vision. The most explicit things otherwise are Nikki tearing her own face apart, which is deliberately nowhere near her act of bludgeoning Sarah's face in. Nikki also couldn't permanently disfigure her own face, because that would kill the relationship with Bear more than any of her behavior, because it blows apart the idea and aesthetic of her as a trophy. But the movie is less willing to explore that than explore him staying with her despite her clearly neurotic behaviors, because it stops them from going, yo, isn't that so fucked up? Sarah is yet another woman receiving the worst possible fate, falling for a man who cannot possibly fall for her because of, ironically enough, his obsession with status and aesthetic in a society that emphasizes those traits. Damned to a fate of loving a mid-at-best white boy in rural Alabama and dying for it. But that doesn't matter. Nikki, as the more outwardly vied-for woman, is the greater status symbol, and Bear is so emotionally confused and muddled and incapable that he treats the ability to claim Nikki as romantic attraction as opposed to the much better interplay between himself and Sarah that he dismisses and outright isn't aware of until told by Nikki at the start of the movie.
Sarah's asking about you all day today. How do you feel about that?
You're asking if I have feelings for Sarah?
Nikki and Sarah are both perfect imperfect victims. They both also ultimately fall victim to Dworkin's idea of the self. They, as women, possess no immutable, unquestionable idea of self. In a literal sense, we see Nikki's sense of self that she attempts to develop be forcefully quashed and eradicated by a man, Bear, in order to, as Dworkin puts it, express his absolute right to take what it needs to sustain itself as a man, while Sarah's sense of self is absent in a metaphorical sense. We learn immediately that Ian loves trivia night. We eventually learn that Bear perhaps wants to be a food critic.
You food critic or something?
You put ketchup on your steak.
I'll come in.
We learn nothing about Nikki, except for the fact that she hates her dad. And the second we learn anything about Sarah, it is to build her up with her own sense of self, free from male meddling, only to focus her solely as a being hinged on her connection to a man. Here, Bear, in the car, and throughout their whole lives. And her sense of self is made to be crushed by another woman by the people creating and directing the movie. Then, she is paraded about as a tribute to patriarchy, femicide, an example of what happens to women who attempt to assert their selves. I'm not a fan of movies dumbing down their messages. My issue with the movie is that the message, despite its contents focusing on the psychology and interaction of the whole group, is just, yo, Bear is so fucked up. Isn't this whole thing so fucked up? It's because Bear is so fucked up. But if you look at why Bear is fucked up and what they give for that, it's a whole bunch of behaviors, but not an actual answer why. The closest we get to investigating these attitudes is when he goes,
"You're so beautiful, and you are normal, and you are normal, but
This isn't okay, Nikki.
And they just move on after fake Nikki goes,
Just be normal.
it's a take on nice guy syndrome and entitlement and exploitation by men against women and how it harms everyone involved without actually pressing into what can result in those identities or identity issues. I kind of just think the movie isn't nearly as deep as people are trying to present, but it has bombastic and complex emotion, and it's really fucking people up. My issue with the movie is that it's really, really good interpersonal drama, but when you zoom in and don't build out the understanding of the very complex machinations behind these bombastic emotions, it falls flat for me. I could be an outlier in this to a degree. I kind of understand that I am, but when I look and see what results from the events of the movie, what they were trying to show, and the topics they definitely skirted around or purposely blew past, it cuts through the strong acting and interesting decisions. I'd still recommend it as a watch. I'd probably watch it again. It's funny, it's got some fantastic sequences, it's got some shit well worth the price of admission. I didn't pay. Take that with a grain of salt. I did not pay to watch this movie. I just know there's more it purposely leaves behind, and it falls into some behaviors that I just cannot co-sign. A lot of this stuff in here is like, yeah, they did that on purpose, but there's decades of systemic issues that normalize this kind of stuff. So when they do that on purpose, when the characters do something, justifying it in lore or in the world or whatever reduces the fact that there are people on the outside influenced by things that are making the decisions to make the characters do these things and present them in the way they're being done. I have really high standards when people say something was as good as Obsession was supposed to be, and the movie met a few. Adding to the context behind Bear making those choices in Obsession would make it a bit more engaging. I think mostly Obsession is very style, a couple morsels of substance. It toys with the men who say, I want and I am entitled to have, therefore I am. It could even make them think. But it does not truly engage with, as Dworkin says, the laws and customs that protect it. Therefore, it becomes the art and literature in which it is proclaimed.